Hey everyone, how's it going? I finally found the time to sit down and make a video to do a recap on the charity gift tournament that I took part more than a week ago. It was a very well run tournament, a wonderful opportunity to meet all the wonderful UK folk that I miss so much. Just a big thanks to everyone who went there and who made it possible. In particular, big thanks to Richard for coordinating this entire thing, from organizing the donations to organizing the auction to chasing people for money and setting up all the prizes. It was a lot of hard work, and yeah, I'm very happy to be able to be part of it. So to talk about the tournament itself, well, I was assigned Biotech and Noise. Biotech, you've seen some videos on it that I posted earlier on. As it turned out, it didn't work out all that well. I was even with it on the day because I ran against a lot of criminals on the day. And as it turns out, this Rush Greenhouse is actually really bad against criminal. As a Rush deck, you want to dedicate all your eyes on the remote and maybe one eyes on R&D. You never really want to ice HQ, certainly don't want to ice archives, and that's where the problem lies, because criminals are so good at exploiting an open HQ and even an open archives. As it turns out, crowdfunding is a powerful card that allows criminals to get the money and get the turtle counters to be able to contest your remote. So oftentimes I end up on 4 points, but just completely unable to score the last agenda to win the game. Not to mention that because I'm running a non-economy ID, I get super hammered by diversion of funds. This deck isn't the richest, so getting hit by a diversion of funds is very crippling. Finally, Armor Core is a very powerful breaker against my suite. There's not much I can do, and if I'm purging virus counters, I'm losing the game because I'm not rushing out. So yeah, a lot of problems with the Biotech, unfortunately. As it turned out, I really should have played a net damage brewery variant instead, because people were not teching against net damage, contrary to my expectations. So that's a failure on my part, a bad meta call. And since we've talked more than enough about Biotech in the past videos, we'll skip it and move along to the better of the two decks. Noise! Make some noise! I love how Noise has so many fan-made comics. They are always wonderful to read. But today we'll just be talking about Noise himself. Noise seems like an OP identity to have. Some people might think, oh my gosh, you're just gonna go 6-0 with it, that this idea is impossible to stop in a post-Jackson world. And while it's true that Noise is even more powerful in a post-Jackson world, unfortunately, the game has progressed to a point where Noise just isn't that viable anymore. As you soon realize as I begin to talk about how I came up with my Noise build, yeah, times have changed a lot. Rotation has actually taken away a lot of Noise's toys to the point where a modern day Noise just isn't as good as Noise was back in the day. So yeah, let's go through the challenges that I faced in the deck building phase. The first thing I did was to come up with ideas, general archetypes for Noise. So the first thing that I immediately went to is to my Freedom Kumalo videos, where I was playing with a bunch of viruses in Kumalo. So I was thinking, why not just change the ID, and yeah, you can, it's still the same deck but in a presumably more powerful ID. And as it turns out, that's not the case. So I was thinking of a Yusuf Musazi breaker suite, and that seems really good for Noise, right? 1 install cost viruses that double up as breakers, so that sounds very good. Unfortunately, to get virus tokens on Musashi and Yusuf, you need to make successful runs, and that causes two problems. Firstly, making single accesses nowadays isn't very good. I hate to say it, but that's the truth, because agendas nowadays are a lot more defensive than in the past, right? Back when Noise was powerful in the day, there were no defensive 5-3s, right? I mean, if you think about some of the older days, even Global Food Initiative didn't exist. So back in the day, single accesses were incredibly powerful and were very likely to net you an agenda, because most corps were playing a full 20-point agenda suite, all squishy agendas, right? This isn't the case anymore. Suites tend to be a lot more defensive, so single accesses are less valuable. So the only real thing you can do is to disrupt the corp by trashing their cards. And if that's the strategy you're going for, actually, Kumalo would work better than Noise, because at least with Kumalo you can disrupt certain combo operations or trash certain difficult to deal with ice. But as with for Noise, you don't have this sort of pressure unless you find your imp. And this means that this leads me to the second problem, which is the fact that if you are running early and often to charge up your Musashi and your Yusuf, you auto lose to hard-hitting news. Noise just doesn't have a robust economy engine. In the past, that wasn't a problem because hard-hitting news did not exist back then. The only thing you needed to worry about was getting hit by mid-season replacements. That's the only time where having a credit disadvantage might cause you problems. So back then, the usual solution was to pack Plascrete, or to pack lots of imps to trash your opponent's Scorched Earths. Now it's different. If you don't plink away at the hard-hitting news with your imp, and there's a very good chance you don't, guess what? You're going to be riddled with tags for the rest of the game, and while you might not you won't automatically die. Some decks don't run high-profile target, but you will slowly but surely lose. So this just doesn't work in Noise. If anything, it's still better in Kumalo, so I opted not to go for this build. You'll see that I put a cross sign on the medium. Medium has since rotated, so again, you can only get single accesses at best with Musashi and Yusuf. There's no multi-access with medium like that was the case in the past. The next idea I came up with was a credit denial Noise. Instead of running Musashi and Yusuf, I'm going to use Omakua as my virus breaker. Now, Omakua is a lot better in Noise than in Kumalo, because in Kumalo you want to expand those virus counters for your ID ability, whereas with Noise you can just slowly charge up your Omakua. We punish the Corp for purging virus counters by using Fester. That will serve as credit denial, alongside some of the more powerful credit denial viruses like Diwan, like Lamprey. So that seemed to be a very promising archetype, right? The trouble is, from experience, it seems like Corps these days are filthy rich. Between IPO and Geofront and Rashida, Corps will never run out of money. So in a meta game where Corps are super rich, where whether it's asset-based Corps or Glacier Corps, both of them can easily become rich by playing their basic cards like Hedge Fund IPO for Glacier Corps, like Commercial Bankers Group and Pack Campaign for Horizontal Corps, and just use Geofront and Rashida to further the lead, and Noise can't really contest any of that. The end result is that the Corp will still be able to afford to rest their ice, and possibly still be able to afford to purge your Omakua. This is very, very difficult to deal with. It makes your credit denial less good. There's a reason why Diwan and Lamprey don't see a lot of play nowadays. So yeah, there just isn't a critical mass of credit denial cards in Anarch to make this archetype viable. If I could run Diversion of Funds as well, things might be different, but I don't have the influence to do so. One possible credit denial card that existed in the past was Parasite. Parasite allows you to nullify a corpse piece of ice. If you slap a Parasite on something like a DNA tracker, you're spending 2 credits to deny the corp 8 credits worth of ice. So you're coming out ahead that way. However, no such thing. The next best thing you have is Tripano, and that's way too slow, right? Don't forget, all these burst economy cards that I'm talking about on the corpse side are fast. Corps can get the money from them very quickly, Rashida, Geofront, and so on. So you just don't have the time to wait for Tripano to tick up, which is why this deck just doesn't really work out. It's too slow, and the Corp will win before you can get any sizable amount of traction going. So I started to despair right around this point, because it seemed like whether I was playing the Virus Breaker suite or whether I was playing the Omakua based suite, it seemed like there was no way to make Noise work properly. I always ran into the same problem. You can't get your breakers up very easily, and they are very dependent on having virus counters, right? Omakua, Yusuf, Musashi, all of them, if you get lots of virus counters, you'll be way ahead, but if you start lagging behind, the Corp can easily lock you out. And with all the big ice nowadays that exist, Fairchild 3, DNA Tracker, and so on, it's very, very difficult to charge these breakers up. So we have a real problem on our hands. Noise is looking very bleak. So I had to go back to the drawing board and approach this deck building exercise from a completely different direction, right? The issue that I was having was that I was trying to shoehorn Noise into existing deck types. So I was thinking of decks that currently are tier 2 in the meta and trying to swap the ID for Noise. That doesn't work very well. Instead, what I should do is to leverage on Noise's greatest strengths. Take Noise, have a good look at it, see what other cards in the current card pool combo well with it, and then go from there. It must be mentioned that these combos should actually help me win the game, not just some fancy combo that does something cool like give me extra credits or I don't know something. These actually need to be actively and powerful enough to help me win the game. So after some thoughts, here are the most powerful combos with Noise that I could think of. Firstly, Freedom through Equality is a very good card in Noise, especially if corps are running agenda suites that are difficult to win with. You know, you're thinking of 6 agenda Asmari or all 2-pointer Mti Wekundu with Global Food Initiative. Those decks have a very robust agenda suite because the runner has to steal a disproportionate number of agenda points, 8 or 9 agenda points, in order to win the game. Freedom through Equality allows you to bypass that, and you can very reliably fire off Freedom through Equality because you are Noise. You can ensure that if you have 5 to 10 cards in your opponent's your opponent's archive, if you milk 5 to 10 cards with Noise, there's a very good chance that playing Freedom and then running archives will easily net you an agenda. In the past, that wasn't possible because Jackson Howard is there to save the corp from agenda flood in archives. But without Jackson Howard, corps nowadays don't really have a paid ability window to fetch agendas from the bin. So this is a very good combo to get a free agenda point, and if there's anything that can directly advance my win condition, I'm going to snap it up. So this seemed like a very good combo to have. The next combo is with Turntable. Same deal. Because you can reliably put agendas into the bin, Turntable suddenly becomes an incredible card in Noise. This is an interaction that most people did not see beforehand, right? Turntable is actually from the Sand cycle. Back then, Noise was still a thing. So you would think, why don't people run Turntable in Noise? For 2 good reasons. Firstly, Grimoire was way better in Noise. But more importantly also, Turntable isn't that good in the past because Jackson Howard existed. So you can't very reliably trigger Turntable in the past because, again, the corp can easily shuffle agendas from archives back into R&D. However, without Jackson Howard, what we can do is to basically mill a bunch of agendas into the bin as Noise. Then if the corp tries to rush out a powerful agenda like Nisei Mark II or an over-advanced Project Atlas, expecting that the agenda counter on these agendas will help them further their win condition, all you need to do is to slap down Turntable and run archives. They would be forced to pop their agenda counters early, because if they don't, I'm going to steal agendas from the bin and swap their agenda counters back into my score area where they can't use them. So this is a very powerful interaction that is a very hard counter to some of the best corporate rush strategies out there. By neutering the Project Atlas and Nisei Mark II agendas, I'm able to disrupt the corp's ability to pump out future agendas and perhaps prolong the game so that my virus milling can set in to help me win the game. If the game goes long, Noise typically has the advantage because you're putting lots of cards into the bin. So yeah, so these are the main combos I've identified that work very well in the current meta. Yeah, one last thing that I thought about was the late game inevitability. As I mentioned, Noise has a very powerful late game where most of the corpse cards are in the bin, which basically means that most of their agendas are vulnerable in the bin, ready for you to steal. A way to guarantee that the win is in archives is to use labor rights when you run out of cards in your deck. So this is a very powerful recursion card. I don't have it on my screen here, but basically Deja Vu has rotated out. This was the go-to recursion card for Noise back in the day, and one of the main reasons why Noise was so strong. The ability to convert one card in Deja Vu to 2 virus mills because you recur 2 viruses was very powerful. However, labor rights is even better because it allows you to convert one card in labor rights into 3. Yes, 3 viruses. You put 3 viruses back into your deck and you start drawing them and installing them. So that's the idea. Get to the bottom of your deck as quickly as possible, then use your 3 copies of labor rights in your deck to recur your caches. Every labor rights is 3 mills off the top of the corp's R&D. By the time you've used your 3rd labor rights, you've almost certainly milled out the corp and you probably win on milling the corp anyway. So that's absolutely amazing. So we are going to build our deck around all these cards and interactions. The main question to ask ourselves here is, how are we going to get to the bottom of our deck? The thing with labor rights is, if you use labor rights halfway through your deck, it's not that effective. Most likely you won't have 3 caches in your bin, and even if you do, you won't reliably draw into them that quickly. So this is another big problem. Again, you see how rotation has severely crippled Noise. No Deja Vu, no Medium, no Parasite, and no Wild Side. So you can't draw your deck as quickly as you used to be able to do. So all we can do is to use the tier 1 Anarch draw cards nowadays, which is I've Had Worse and Street Peddler. So that's fine. 6 Anarch draw cards in a 45 card deck. If you've ever built Valencia or any regular Anarch deck before, you know that 6 draw cards is not enough. Particularly if you're looking to reliably get to the bottom of your deck. You need more. So the next best draw card would be Earthrise Hotel, but that's prohibitively expensive. Noise is not a rich runner at all. You are already that vulnerable to hard-hitting news. Earthrise just opens up a lot more weaknesses to tag-based strategies. So I wasn't a fan of Earthrise at all. I've looked through the entire card pool. I just can't find any draw cards that work. You can't afford to splash influence for it either, because your influence is tied up with Aesop's cash. So the only good card remaining is Inject. Now this is a ridiculous card to play in Noise, because Inject trashes your programs, meaning that it trashes your viruses. Why would you put viruses in your bin as Noise? It doesn't make sense at all. But the more I thought about it, actually the more it made sense, because I'm already running 3 copies of Clone Chip. So Inject actually helps me find these viruses quicker. Sure, I won't get as many mills as I would get without playing Inject, but to me the speed was crucial, because I know a lot of corps will be going super fast nowadays, especially without Jackson Howard to mitigate agenda flood. So I need to keep up with the corp, and Inject's the only card that allows me to go click for click, keep up with the corp. If the corp fires a Rashida, for example, I need to be able to trade blows with them by firing my own Inject to dig through my deck as well. So this is my reasoning behind it. It hurts milling your viruses. It never feels good seeing cash being revealed by Inject and going into the bin. But that's how we have to play. This will allow us to get our labor rights going. Right, so one last problem. Even though we've discussed how we are going to win the game, even though we've discussed how going to late game allows us to win with Noise, we haven't really addressed the white elephant in the room. How are you going to get to the late game? Right? We know that in the late game we are very powerful, we have labor rights, we have freedom through equality, and turntable can kind of slow the corp down, but turntable doesn't reduce the number of agenda points the corp has scored. They can still continue pumping agendas in remotes, and frankly speaking, Noise doesn't have good breakers. If you remember the old Noise decks back in the day, they used to run a very powerful breaker called Faust. Right? Faust was Imba. Now that's banned, and now that ice are bulkier, we can't do that, nor do we have Parasite to chew down our opponent's ice. This is a problem. So you can see here that I propose Stim Hack as a solution to that. This is inspiration from the regular Anarch decks, which always run 3 copies of Stim Hack. It just makes so much sense. Run the Bin Breakers, which makes sense because you are already running Inject and Street Peddler to mill your deck. So running the Conspiracy Breakers means that you are using money to break ice, which is fine because Stim Hack allows you to break said ice for virtually no money. So that was going to be my plan, but then I realized there was a much better solution than Stim Hack. Enter a card that almost no one sees and hence no one expects, Run Amok. This is the card that Noise needs. This is the card that changes my entire deck, that makes it so much better than it was before. Because previously, this deck had no remote pressure whatsoever, right? Even if you get your breakers out and run through the remote, you're still going to get taxed out by the corp. Ice is expensive to use to break nowadays. The corp is simply going to keep jamming NGO fronts, keep jamming Rashidas into the remote, and you can't keep up. Run Amok is the ice destruction, the next best ice destruction tool now that Parasite is gone, and it works perfectly. It does 2 things that we badly need. Firstly, it provides ice destruction, and secondly, it allows us to challenge remotes, which is what Stim Hack's function was. So these 2 functionalities tied into one card makes it a perfect card for us to use. Run Amok, destroying our opponent's remote ice, allows us to, basically slow down their agenda advancement. And, by delaying the rate at which they get to 7 agenda points, we will be able to get to the bottom of our deck more like, faster. Or rather, we are more likely to get to the bottom of our deck, and that's how we win. So that's the deck. That's the deck list. There are some very interesting choices here. You'll notice that I'm actually not running Musashi and Yusuf as breakers, even though they make more sense in noise being viruses, and that's simply because our console of choice is turntable. Without Grimoire, without lots of memory, we simply cannot afford to run a Yusuf Musashi rig. That will only leave us with one dangling memory to play out other programs, and one dangling memory is definitely not enough as noise. So yeah, this is a very big problem. Losing Grimoire means that we are forced to play normal breakers. You'll also notice that this deck isn't really about running, and that's very important. I expect that a lot of charity gift corps will be Wayland and NBN, and those corps generally will want to use hard-hitting news as one of their win conditions. Noise cannot deal with hard-hitting news in the early game very well, so it's very important that we play a passive game of net installer, at least in the early stages, by just dropping lots of caches and data suckers, selling them with eSorts Pawn Shop, and when they attempt to advance agenda, only then do we go in for the Run Amok. We ignore the centrals for the most part unless we absolutely need to run or we have a very good reason. For example, if we want to activate Turntable or Freedom, only then will we run Archives. That's right. Most other noise decks would simply turn 1 install Data Sucker and then run Archives just to get a Data Sucker counter. We don't do that. We leave all the cards face down in Archives because we want agendas to actually pile up in Archives. We don't want to steal them. We only steal them if we can activate Freedom through Equality or Turntable as a result. So that is the key concept behind this deck. Agendas are not there for us to steal. Agendas are there to slow down the corp or to bring us to 7 points with Freedom through Equality. Right? It's a very passive game deck, and frankly speaking, perhaps a bit uninteractive, which most people won't like. But because corps are so powerful right now, actually a lot of my games end up being fairly dynamic in the sense that I was forced to make some go out of my way to contest remotes or to make some really strange moves in order to, get the agendas that I want, or to pressure the corp in various ways. Here's an example from one of the games that I had over the charity gift tournament. This was against Simon's Nyx design deck. This was an absolutely crazy roller coaster of a turn, and I can't even believe I pulled it off. So yeah, hold your horses. I'm going to animate this turn in detail on your screen right here. So my opponent, Simon, was playing a Nyx design Glacier deck, running Ginger City Grid. Their remote was from top to bottom. Fairchild 3, Border Control, Seder. 3 of these eyes were unrest. I know that the identity of the eyes only because my opponent reviewed them with Ginger City Grid, so I knew exactly what I should expect on the remote. But I knew that it was a very difficult remote to go through. All the eyes were very high strength, and I don't have very efficient breakers. All I had was a Black Orchestra in the bin, along with a couple of other viruses, a couple of caches and stuff. When my opponent started to install and advance an agenda in there, I knew that I had to go get it because this was going to be the difference between them getting to match point and me getting, getting a huge advantage. So I knew I had to contest the remote. I had 2 clone chips installed along with a Yusuf and an Imp. No paper clips in the bin, I think. A sizable amount of cash, but what good is cash when you don't have Yusuf counters? Yusuf is my only barrier breaker here in this scenario, and getting past Border Control and Double Seder was going to be an uphill challenge. So I looked at my hand, there were a bunch of labor rights and, a couple of Run Amoks and an Imp. So, my gears started ticking. It took me a while before I could work the turn out, but here's what I did. Click 1, I went to play Run Amok on the remote. Of course, this is always a very powerful play as it puts the corp in a very difficult bind. If they want to preserve their ice, they have to no res, which means that all I need to do is to break the innermost Seder barrier, and that will allow me to steal the advanced Vitruvius in the remote. Of course, my opponent wasn't going to allow me to do that, so they rezzed the border control. This was a good ice to res because, you know, one way or another, that border control is going to get trashed anyway, whether my opponent activates his ability or whether I end the run with Run Amok. Run Amok obviously trashing one of the ice res during the run. So after my opponent rezzed the border control, I realized that they didn't have a lot of money left. They only had money to res one of the other pieces of ice, either the Fairchild or the Satyr. They couldn't afford both. So I knew I needed to break both border control subroutines. Otherwise, if I let the first one fire, they would have enough money to res both ice. So to break border control with Yusuf, I need 2 virus counters, but I only have 1 on the imp. So it was at this point that I popped my clone chip for a cash. The cash came with 3 virus counters, which I wasn't going to use for money. Instead, I spent 2 counters to break the border control. At this point, I decided to jack out. Normally, you would continue the run to force the corp to use border control's ability. But because this was a Run Amok run, I knew that if I jacked out, border control would be forced to be trashed anyway because of Run Amok's ability. So I jacked out, border control goes in the bin. Click 2 was playing the second Run Amok in my hand, and you see how this card is really powerful. If you have multiple Run Amoks in your hand, you know, you can easily chew away at a 4 ice server like this one. So now my opponent has to choose between rezzing the Fairchild 3 or the innermost Satyr. They saw that I had the Black Orchestra in the bin but no paperclip, so they knew that in order to tax me out, since I had a sizable amount of cash, it would make more sense to res the inner Satyr. So they res the Satyr, which is now at 5 strength. 3 ice on the remote, meaning that it's at 5 strength. This costs 3 virus counters for Yusuf, so I'm gonna find 3 virus counters for myself, courtesy of the second clone chip, which fetches me another copy of cash in my bin. So 3 virus counters spent on that Satyr. Normally you would continue here, however, I chose to jack out, because by jacking out, I would be able to kill yet another ice on that server, making it that much easier for me to rerun that server, because now the innermost Satyr barrier is only on 4 strength. So on my third click, I decided to install another copy of Imp from my hand. This gives me the 2 virus counters needed to go through the Satyr barrier one last time. This was a normal run. They couldn't rest the outermost Fairchild without enough money, so I spent the virus counters, 1 from cash, 1 from the second Imp, to get past the final Satyr, getting to the bottom of the server, accessing and stealing the Vitruvius, but more importantly, because I have leftover Imp counters, I was able to Imp the Ginger Grid and get rid of a very big problem. That is to say, my opponent stacking lots of ice on the remote, making it very difficult for me to contest it. By trashing the Ginger, that put a severe dent in my opponent's board state, but more importantly, by stealing the Vitruvius, I got myself a 4 agenda point swing, denied them 2 agenda points, and got myself 2 agenda points, and that was why I needed to secure the win as the game went on later. So that was a very crazy play, because this deck doesn't really rely on Yusuf as the main breaker, but my opponent very smartly stacked lots of barriers on the remote, forcing me to go out of my way to make these really crazy cache install plays just so I can get lots of virus counters. I even had to trash one of my caches during that turn, because as you can see, the total memory exceeds my memory limit, so I needed to overwrite some of my caches. But through all this virus juggling, I managed to find enough virus counters to get Yusuf to successfully plow through my opponent's remote. So yeah, that was very crazy. You know, using cache installs to get virus counters to use Yusuf. The best part of it, however, if you remember, I am Noise. So throughout this entire turn, all my installs with Clone Chip and the final Imp install all triggered a mill 1 for the corp. At the end of this turn, not only did I get a 4 agenda point swing, not only did I ruin my opponent's remote board state, I also forced them to put 3 cards into the bin with Noise. That was crazy. That was absolutely beautiful to watch, and that was my favorite play of the entire charity gift tournament. Right, I'm sad I didn't get footage of that game because that was quite an epic game indeed. However, I had recorded some of my other games which I'll be showcasing in time to come. So tune in a future video where I'll be doing commentary on one of my games that I played over the course of the weekend. For now, I hope you enjoyed this purely theory crafting video. I think it shows you how I can tackle you know, a known meta with an unknown deck. Building Noise for charity gift was a huge challenge because it was so different to traditional Noise. I couldn't simply net deck a deck and, yeah, it was just not possible because all the old net decks were no longer legal. More importantly, I was not able to test my brew on JNet. There's there's no way I'm gonna be able to find anyone who would play their corp against my noise. So yeah, I just had to go blind into the tournament and cross my fingers and hope that my theory crafting worked out. It didn't for my biotech, but at least I can confidently say my noise did the heavy lifting and got me 5 wins and 1 loss throughout the entire day, losing only to a Blue Sun deck that got me with a Res Archer on the remote. Noise doesn't really like breaking archers on remotes, and without Parasite to deal with it, I was going to bleed credits one way or another. So yeah, otherwise that was a great tournament, and yeah, not much else to say. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for listening to my rambling. Till next time, happy net running. See ya.